Astronomy in Reverse by Pansley. Chapter 5. The Inevitable Goodbye. It's well into late spring, on a warm, sunny afternoon, when Bucky arrives home from work and finds Peter sitting abayet on the love seat, waiting for him. He can tell the second his eyes land on the kid's face that something is up. His backpack, sitting prominently on the floor between his legs, seems jarringly out of place, almost religiously so. Peter looks up at him when he enters and smiles, but there's tension there around his eyes and mouth, a nervousness in his expression that makes him look different and strange. "Hi," he says, and his voice at least sounds as it always does, relieved. "Welcome home."
"Thanks,"
Bucky says, biting down on the impulse to immediately demand to know what's wrong.
"Did school go okay?"
"Yeah," Peter replies, leaning forward slightly over top his bag. "It's just this note."
"What note?"
Bucky asks, moving in closer and watching as Peter unzips his bag, retrieving a folded, crumpled-looking sheet of paper. He hands it to Bucky somewhat hesitantly, his eyebrows furrowing. "It's a permission slip." Bucky takes it, opening it with a confused look in Peter's direction.
"A what?"
"A permission slip," Peter says again, pointing to the address typed in bold letters at the top of the page. "We're supposed to go to the Smithsonian in D.C. at the end of the month. We need our parents to sign the form saying we can go." Bucky's eyes dart over the page, hesitating on the line marked parent signature. He looks down at Peter's face, feeling dread and apprehension swell at the hopeful look in the boy's eyes.
"Kid."
"Please! I changed homes so many times this year, they won't even think twice about it. I doubt they'll even look at me too closely. And if they do, they could just call you, right? And you could say you're my guardian, and that it's okay if I go."
"Peter."
Bucky starts to protest, but the kid gives him the biggest, shiniest, begging eyes Bucky has ever seen. "Please! I really want to go! I haven't been able to go on any high school field trips yet. Please! I'll use my money and everything!"
"I can't sign this,"
says Bucky, hating the words as they leave his mouth, hating the crushed look on Peter's face even more. Peter slumps his shoulders as defeated as an extinguished fire.
"We can't. We shouldn't leave a paper trail of this, okay? It's too risky. It would be really bad if people found out you're living with me. You know that."
"But," Peter starts, but Bucky cuts him off sternly, putting his foot down.
"I'm not signing anything,"
he says, keeping his tone unapologetic, though he feels it radiating in his chest.
"Oh, that's final."
Peter looks wounded, lowering his head slightly as he gives a short nod. "Okay," he says as miserably as Bucky feels. "I understand."
"Good,"
Bucky says, handing the form back to him and then ruffling the boy's hair fondly. He wants to apologize, wants to tell Peter everything, tell him that every second they spend together is 1 second closer to being hunted down, that any connection linking them together is a bullet pointing at Peter's head, but he doesn't. He's not ready to tell Peter anything, not any of it. Least of all how dangerous it is to stay with him, though he should have months ago, the moment he showed up on his porch. Bucky's elbow deep in the engine of a 1998 Toyota something or other, standing next to Frank in the garage behind his dealership, his shift nearly over, when his cell phone starts buzzing incessantly in his pocket. It's a crappy burner phone that doesn't have caller ID, so Bucky keeps his eyes on the bolt he's tightening as he puts the phone to his ear and answers it.
"Hello."
"Hey!" Peter says on the other line, amidst a sea of other voices and sounds, the chatter of kids filling a narrow hallway. I was wondering, can I go to a friend's house tonight?" Bucky stops, his brows furrowing slightly.
"Who?"
My friend Ned, the one I've been telling you about. He's letting me use his phone. He lives here in Midtown. He invited me to spend the night and hang out and stuff. Can I?" A familiar tendril of uncertainty creeps its way up Bucky's back to the nape of his neck. He purses his lips, grateful that Peter can't see the unsure expression on his face.
"You can,"
he says slowly to make sure Peter is paying attention.
"But I need his address and contact information. And you don't have anything with you to spend the night with, do you? No toothbrush or change of clothes?"
"Yeah," Peter agrees.
"Okay. So you can spend the night, but I want you to head home first. Grab what you need and leave me a note so I know where you'll be and how to get a hold of you. Sound fair?"
"Yeah," Peter says, and Bucky can hear the warm smile in his voice, the thinly veiled excitement. "Thanks, I'll see you tomorrow, I guess."
"Yeah."
he says, keeping his tone even.
Have a good night, kid. Be good.
I will, replies Peter softly. Bye.
Bye.
Bucky hangs up, gazing at his phone for a moment before he pockets it. This will be the first time in, God, how many weeks? Months has it been since Peter came to live with him. The last of the snow was just melting that night they met, and now the days are long and bright and getting hotter with each passing one. And this will be the first time in however long ago that was that Peter won't be there when Bucky gets home. That he'll have gone an entire day and night without seeing the kid. Next to him, Frank shifts his weight as he clears his throat, and when Bucky glances up at him from under the brim of his hat, the man is eyeing him calculatingly. Who was that? Bucky hesitates, mind going blank. What the heck is he supposed to say? Oh, nobody, just a runaway foster kid I've been secretly and illegally taken care of, not to mention endangering since I'm technically on the run. There's no semblance of the truth that Bucky could tell Frank that wouldn't raise questions or alarms in the man's mind, so Bucky says the next best thing, the most believable lie, yes.
That was my kid.
Frank looks surprised, his dark eyes widening until Bucky can see every speck of copper in his irises. Shit, Barnes, I had no idea you were a father.
Yeah,
Bucky says, swallowing thickly.
Just got the one.
How old? Boy? Girl?
Boy.
He keeps his head down, but not to hide his shame. He isn't worried about Frank seeing the lie on his face. He's worried he'll see the pride, the inexplicable burst of admiration he feels at telling someone about Peter for the very first time.
He'll be 15 next month.
Frank grunts, returning to his task of refurbishing the interior seats with a slight nod of his head. Tough age. You had him young.
Yeah,
says Bucky, ducking his head behind the car's hood.
But he's a good kid. He's amazing. He's wicked smart. An honor student, actually. And he stays out of trouble. He's nothing like me.
Hell, Frank said, leaning over and giving Bucky a one-eyebrow raised look. That's the first time in the 3 months you've been here that I've seen you smile, Barnes. Though a part of him tries not to, the rest of Bucky breaks out in an honest, wide grin, brimming with pride.
I'm lucky to have him,
he says. The conversation fades, and eventually, Frank leaves him to his work and returns to tend the dealership. The rest of Bucky's afternoon goes by smoothly, but as he makes his way home, an odd sense of misplacement takes over him. It's a terrifying thought, the realization that though he spent a year living in his apartment alone, knowing that Peter isn't going to be there has stopped it from feeling like home. But the closer he gets to the apartment, the more that lost feeling twists and changes into something worse, something darker. By the time his building comes into sight, Bucky feels almost sick, weighed down with dread and an ominous foreboding that coils in his stomach like an oily serpent. It lasts all the way until he pushes his door open, and then Bucky knows exactly what's wrong as soon as he sees it. The standalone counter dividing the kitchen and the rest of the studio is bare, save for his journal, open to the newest page with a pen resting on top of it. Bucky's stomach drops at the sight. His journal. Heart-pounding, Bucky moves forward until he's resting his hands on the counter, as if needing to see it up close to confirm his suspicions. The page has a name, an address, and a phone number written on it. Ned Leeds, in Peter's usual messy print, and there's nothing off about it, nothing of note, and yet Bucky feels sick at the sight. Peter has no way of knowing just how sensitive the information inside of this journal is. He probably only ever saw Bucky use it as an address book, a list of contacts. He doesn't know that the first 100 pages were all dedicated to him, to figuring out who Bucky Barnes is, mapping together the scattered remnants of his past self. But he must know it now. He doesn't know if it's just the anxiety, the swirling, insidious idea that one day Peter would find out everything about him, would learn this terrible thing that Bucky wants so badly to protect him from. But Bucky can feel his heartbeat hammering inside his chest. Peter knows, he knows, Peter knows. He could feel it deep within the chasm of his torso. Peter knows about Sergeant James Buchanan Barnes. He knows about the Howling Commandos. The first half of this journal is just scrawls and scraps of memory in fragments, pieces of events as they came to him, hastily scribbled down in the middle of the night before he lost them. Memories of the war, and of Steve, and of Brooklyn, and his entire life before the fall. And on some pages, just the word Hydra written over and over again, carved into the paper viciously, when all Bucky could do was sit and seethe and grit his teeth at the memories that tried to consume him. But he never wrote them down, never gave them tangible form, and for that Bucky has never been more grateful in his entire life. Peter might know about James Buchanan Barnes, but he doesn't know about the Winter Soldier. But still, he has to make sure Peter is all right. Has to quell this roiling anxiety in his chest. He knows this raging storm inside him won't die down until he hears Peter's voice, until he knows the boy's all right. He pulls out his cell phone and dials the number Peter scribbled on the page. An unsure adolescent voice answers on the second ring. Hello?
This Ned reads.
Yeah. Bucky doesn't bother sweetening the tone of his voice, so we can tell the kid is a little unnerved by his gruff baritone.
I'm looking for Peter,
he says. Oh! The kid exclaims, nervousness instantly gone to Bucky's confusion. You must be Peter's dad! He said he'd be giving you my number. Bucky blinks, taken aback.
Yeah. He there?
Now Ned's the one who sounds confused. No, he said something came up. He said he'd be over later. Bucky's fist clenches, the metal clanking as it knocks together. His stomach drops in the wake of the anxiety, rearing its ugly head once more.
Did he say where he was going?
No, sorry, said Ned in a somewhat slow drawl. Frowning, Bucky sternly says,
When he shows up, tell him to call me.
And then goes to hang up, his thumb stilling over the button for half a second as Ned happily calls out, Okay, I will. Bye, Peter's dad. Bucky hesitates, then hangs up with more vitriol than really necessary, his stomach flipping at the strange mix of emotions coursing through him. He has to find Peter. He turns, searching the room desperately for any hint or clue where Peter would have disappeared to. He finds nothing, so he breaks for the door and leaves the apartment behind without a second thought, making for the closest spot where he thinks Peter might be, the nearest neighbor with a dog. Peter isn't loitering outside the neighbor's fenced yard, or hanging over the side of any of the other ones nearby. He isn't at Del Mar's, pestering the cat or talking the old man's ear off. He isn't at the park or running the trails that serpentine behind the freeway, and he isn't swinging through buildings by his webs brazenly obstructing criminal activity in the early afternoon rush. Bucky heads back to the apartment when his search brings up nothing, but Peter still isn't there, and there's no sign that he has been since Bucky first came home. Bucky slumps tired, defeated, his mind going numb even as his body rages like a hurricane internally, worry and fear and anxiety all festering together in the hungry pit of his stomach. Ned still hasn't called him, there's no sign of Peter anywhere, and he's out of ideas of where the boy could have gone. He hangs his head by his hands as he sits on the couch, the emotional turmoil almost turning to numbness as exhaustion sets in. What if this is it? This day that he knew from the first moment he let Peter into his house was a long time coming. What if this is the day he has to say goodbye to Peter Parker? For comfort more than anything, Bucky lifts his head and glances around at Peter's belongings. The bag of clothes that Bucky made him fold, the books, the DVD cases, the pile of loose pieces of paper, old homework and notes and tests marked with bright red 100% on them, the Spanish test Bucky helped him study for, speaking to him in Spanish the whole evening as they made and ate dinner, and the training after, remembering Peter's wide, bright grin a few days later as he bounded through the door and lifted the test for Bucky to see, so proud of that 100%. How proud Bucky had been of him that day, how his chest felt warm and light in the presence of that smile. Bucky lifts the test from the stack, wanting to believe more than anything that Peter will forgive him for the lies, or at least give him the chance to explain before he decides to leave. When he sees it below the Spanish test among the stack of papers, the sheet with a big, bold Smithsonian Institution printed on it. His hand still, and then he reaches for the paper and lifts it up. It's the permission slip. Bucky reads it again, once, twice, and a third time, before he feels his chest tighten once more, and he sits back on the love seat and lets the form rest limply in his lap. Peter kept it even though Bucky refused to sign it. Couldn't sign it even though he wanted to, and he did. Does. He wants nothing more than for Peter to have this, a home with someone who can give him things like this, opportunities, experiences, things that Bucky is too afraid to take part in, knowing that he is willingly endangering this kid's life more and more every single day. And even still, Peter kept it, as if throwing away that opportunity had been too difficult, even though Bucky had blatantly refused it to him. A coldness seeps through him then as he realizes where Peter has gone. Peter would want to see it with his own eyes. He would want to know, would want to confirm the things he read in Bucky's journal for himself. Bucky stands, phone and keys in hand, as he exits the apartment. He heads straight for the bus stop, but even as he walks, doubt fills him. Maybe this inevitable goodbye, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Maybe this is a chance for Peter to find a real home, a real family. Someone who could actually adopt him, who could sign permission slips for him, could give him all the things Bucky can't. Maybe this is the sign that it's time for Bucky to let Peter go. Even with that thought plaguing him, Bucky continues moving. He catches the long bus to D.C., to the Smithsonian, watches the sun dip lower and lower as he continues searching the crowds for Peter, seeking him out amongst the horde of pedestrians in the street, filing in and out of the museum in long, wide lines. Bucky searches every room and hallway open to the public 3 times. He loops back around to the Howling Commandos display over and over again, hardly even sparing his own exhibit a glance as he scans benches and counts heads looking for Peter. But there's no sign of him here, either. Defeated, Bucky makes his way out of the institution, fully intending on calling Ned one more time and trying to find a bus back to New York when, by chance, he glances across the street and sees a sign. It derails his attempt at giving up, and Bucky spins on his heel and jogs across the road, dodging a honking car dismissively as he keeps his eyes fixed on the sign. Below it, a walking trail leads from the sidewalk into a park, and Bucky heads down it unhesitatingly, some strange magnetic pull guiding him through the trees, his anxiety calmed for the first time in hours. The trail curls around and leads to a wide-open park. Benches lined along the perimeter of a long field, filled with people playing fetch with their dogs. Bucky sees him as soon as he steps off the trail. There's a bench several yards ahead of him, just off the side of the path, bathed in the same orange light that covers the whole park as the sun sets. Bucky watches Peter, sitting sullenly on the bench, his face in profile, gazing down at a panting dog that seems to be contentedly keeping him company, absent-mindedly petting the dog's head as he stares down at the grass, his eyes dim and downcast as he sits, lost in thought. The sight of Peter, sitting there, having come to D.C. all alone to find the truth, only to have ended up here in this roadside park by himself, sitting and watching the dogs play, undoubtedly petting as many as he can, while the thoughts eat at him, while sunlight beams through the canopy and paints him in the reds and yellows of sunset. It strikes Bucky deeply, a basic and very instinctual need to protect this kid at all costs. Hydra be damned, Steve Rogers and the Avengers be damned. The sight of his kid alone on that bench hits Bucky and fills him with so much love that all earlier thoughts of not being good enough for Peter are drowned out. He knows he isn't good enough. Peter deserves everything, and Bucky can't give him more than what's at his table, but he'll raise this whole world to the ground before he lets anyone ever hurt this boy. Bucky approaches slowly, and the dog jumps up and runs off as its master calls it away. Peter looks up as he watches it go, and then his eyes land on Bucky, and he sits up straighter and blinks owlishly up at him as the man approaches. Bucky gets close enough that he can clearly see the gold of the sunset reflecting in those large dark eyes, and then he stops.
Peter,
he says, practically a sigh, not bothering to hide the relief in his voice in the slightest. Bucky! Peter says, bewildered. How did you... Why are you... What are you doing here?
I came to find you,
he says, though part of him wants to scream. I've been looking for you everywhere!
I called Ned.
Peter sinks further into the bench, his shoulders hunching sheepishly. I'm sorry, he says, eyes downcast. I was going to go to Ned's, I needed to come here first is all. How did you know where I was? Bucky frowns, clenching his metal fist as he debates what to tell him, but he doesn't even know where to begin.
I found the permission slip.
he says. Peter's cheeks reddened slightly, though Bucky can't fathom why he would be embarrassed. Peter looks up at them shyly, then back down to his lap and says, "Yeah, I'm sort of bummed I can't go on the field trip, so I thought, hey, it's Friday night, I could just go now and wait, but, how did you know I was here?" He gestures at the park around them, and Bucky almost wants to smile as he says,
"I saw the dogs allowed sign at the park entrance from across the street and knew that if you'd seen it too, then you would be here."
Peter smiles, warm and somewhat flattered, before something more serious flashes across his face and he ducks his head again. Bucky sighs, stepping forward and taking a seat beside the kid on the bench, watching the park steadily empty as the sun finishes setting.
"Kid,"
he says quietly after a long moment,
"I know why you came here."
What do you mean?"
"Cut the crap,"
Bucky says, not unkindly, leaning back to rest his metal arm on the back of the bench, turning so that he's half facing Peter.
"You know what I mean. I know you came here for the Howling Commandos exhibit. I know you read my journal."
Peter's head snaps up, turning to Bucky with wide, panicked eyes, his skin paling even more with the sun now hidden completely beyond the horizon. Bucky can see the slight tremble in the kid's legs, and then Peter frantically says, "I'm sorry, Bucky, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I swear it was an accident, I just thought it was an address book, I didn't mean to see anything, but then I saw that photo of you, and I wanted to just ask you when I should have, but then I thought, what if I'm just being stupid and suspicious, but that photo was of you, and I couldn't understand, I still don't understand how but please don't be mad, please, Bucky, please don't be mad!"
"I'm not mad,"
Bucky says, but the panicked look in Peter's eyes doesn't fade, so Bucky reiterates,
"Hey, kid, I mean it. I'm not mad,
He sighs, feeling his shoulders sag slightly at the realization that he doesn't know what to say.
Here's the thing. If you're going to stay with me..."
He feels the boy's body stiffen like he's been turned to stone, and when he glances over at Peter and sees the wetness pooling in his eyes, Bucky stops short, confused by the small trembling sound of Peter begging, "Please, Bucky, please." And then the next thing he knows, Peter's whole body is racked with trembles and the tears are streaming from his eyes. "I won't do it again, I promise I won't do it again, please." Bucky almost can't understand him through his heaving sobs, and then Peter looks back up at him with his wide, dark, wet eyes, and Bucky's heart drops into his stomach as heavy and cold as if it was turned to stone when Peter says, "Please don't leave me, please don't, I'll be good, I promise, so please don't leave me, Bucky, I want to stay with you."
"Hey,"
Bucky tries, panic in his own voice, though Peter doesn't stop crying until Bucky takes him by the shoulders and shushes him gently.
Hey, kid, calm down, it's alright. I didn't mean it like that. Hey."
He takes Peter's head in his hands and shushes him again, and then says, once the boy's sobs have died down a little,
"I'm not leaving you, kid. What I meant was, if you're going to choose to stay with me, and I only mentioned that because... Look, here's the thing, Peter."
Bucky sighs, letting the kid go and leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees wearily. He resists the urge to duck his head, exhaustion and unease filling him.
"I owe you an explanation. I know I do. But here's the thing, Peter,
His jaw clenches and Bucky brings his hands together and does lower his head, now bracing himself, so terrified of saying what he knows needs to be said. What he should have said months ago.
It's not safe with me."
Peter goes rigid again beside him, and Bucky can see the boy's hands and knees start to shake, no doubt on the cusp of begging him again, so Bucky continues before he gets the chance.
"I'm being hunted, Peter."
He can feel the kid's eyes boring into the side of his head, and Bucky has to try very hard to resist the urge to turn and meet his gaze. He clasps his hands together to keep himself from gripping the wooded bench too tightly and says,
"I'm just going to be honest with you here, kid. There are some really bad people after me. There's a reason I live the way I do, and it's not just because I was born in 1917. I'm on the run."
He does turn to look at Peter now, and stares straight into his eyes as he continues, his voice deceptively calm in contrast with the anxiety coiled in his gut.
Every minute you spend with me, you're in danger. I don't care about that. Let me finish,
Bucky urges, and Peter quiets down, his face twisted with worry.
There's no if about whether or not they find me. It's a when. And that when is going to end in a fight. To the death. You're in danger just knowing me, let alone living with me, kid. And if I tell you everything about where I was for that 70 years, I can't do that, Peter. I'm already putting you at too much of a risk. If they find out you know, they'll go out of their way to take you out. I can't let that happen.
He looks back down at his hands, feels the hard, solid metal of his left fist cradled within his right beneath his glove, squeezing the palm, still half expecting to feel the blood coursing through it even now.
If I was a better man,
he says, swallowing thickly, clenching his hands.
If I was a better man, I would send you away before they find us. I'd take you somewhere you get out the life you deserve and then disappear as far away from you as I could get.
Bucky hazards a glance at him, sees the tears running copiously down his cheeks once more, and sighs, continuing.
But I said I'd take care of you.
He turns to face the boy, laying a hand on his shoulder comfortingly.
And I'm gonna. Honestly, kid, I'm in this too deep now. I'd never get another good night's sleep if I didn't have a way of knowing you were okay. And I can't shoulder that.
He moves his hand from Peter's shoulder up to his face, cupping the back of his head, making sure Peter is looking up at him through his still crying eyes.
So until you decide you want otherwise, you're staying right here with me, kid. I'm not leaving you, even though I should. And I can't tell you the truth, even though you deserve to know it.
Peter brings his hands up, starts wiping his cheeks off and catching the tears that keep falling from his eyes with the backside of his fists. He breathes in deeply, trying to get himself under control, his sobs dying down.
I'm sorry,
he says almost mournfully.
It's just, I'm always thinking that I'm going to lose this someday. Us. I'm so...
He sobs again, curling forward slightly as the words leave him.
I'm so scared all the time that something's going to take this away, that you're going to leave, or then I'll lose you too.
He looks up at Bucky, and Bucky feels a sharp, painful stab of guilt and heartache at the genuinely terrified look on the boy's face.
After my aunt and uncle died,
Peter almost whispers, a little calmer now,
I kept wishing someone would help me. I know that sounds dumb because I have these powers and everything, and I know I'm old enough to take care of myself, but I was so scared and I felt so alone. And then every place they sent me I just started feeling unsafe all the time. I felt like I was going crazy from how scared I constantly was.
Peter stops trying to wipe away his tears, falling too fast for his hands to keep up with.
And then I met you, and you did help me. You cared, and you were there for me, and I latched on because for the first time in so long, I didn't feel scared anymore, and now we live together, and I get to feel like that all the time, but I'm also so panicked. I feel like the rug is going to be pulled out from under my feet. I feel like I'm going to wake up one morning, and I'll be back in foster care getting thrown around or started just completely ignoring you. You won't be there.
Bucky wants to reach out, wants to say, that will never happen. I won't let that happen. But doubts stop him, foaming up like an impenetrable wall between them. He can't predict the future, can't stop things that are out of his control, but in this moment, the temptation to say whatever he has to make Peter stop crying is almost unbearable.
When I opened your journal, when I saw that photo of you from the war and read that stuff you wrote, I thought, this is it. This is the rug being pulled out. I finally found a home, and now I have to lose it again because he's going to Romania, and that'll be it. He'll be gone, and I'll be alone, and I hate that I'm so scared of being alone. But more than that, Bucky, I want to stay with you. I want to stay with you in our home, making dinners and watching movies and training and going to the Mars and walking Dodger and Tessa on the weekends and going to Laundryland and talking in Spanish. I love that. I love all of it. I love living with you and being a family, and I'm scared.
He drops his face into his hands, his small narrow shoulders heaving as he sobs into them. Bucky reaches out, is about to lay his hand on the boy's shoulder again and pull him into a hug when Peter cries, "Please don't leave me! Please, Bucky, don't! I don't want to lose you!" He pulls Peter forward with both hands wrapped securely around the boy's back and holds him tightly against his chest as Peter sobs into his jacket. Bucky embraces him, practically pulling him into his lap as he ducks his face against the top of Peter's head and adamantly ushers into his hair,
"I won't, Peter. I'm not leaving you. I promise I'm not."
Bucky holds him firmly, subtle rocking him in a gentle back-and-forth motion as the kid gradually quiets, devolving from gut-wrenching sobs to softer ones, interrupted by hiccups and sniffles as he tries to take deep breaths through the onslaught of tears.
"Hey,"
Bucky says quietly once Peter has settled down enough to hear him.
"Listen, Peter. I meant what I said, that you're sticking with me for as long as you want to, and when the time comes, then I have to leave New York. You can come with me. I want you to, but I know that that's a lot. It's not exactly a fair trade, I get that, but I'm not going to leave you behind unless you want me to, okay? We're in this together, like you said. Family."
Peter hugs him tighter, and Bucky rests his cheek a little more fully against the boy's hair.
"I won't lie and say things are going to stay like this forever. I wish they could, but I know that eventually I'll have to keep moving. It doesn't have to be Romania. We could go somewhere else, maybe Argentina. Somewhere they speak Spanish, so you could still get around on your own. Somewhere densely populated where we could lay low and start over. We'll figure it out."
"What about," Peter says, but it's muffled against Bucky's cheek, so he leans back slightly and tries again. "What about the Avengers? Captain America he's your friend, right? Can't they help us?" Bucky tenses, unsure of what to say in response to that. Peter's big dark eyes gazing questioningly up at him. He swallows, then clears his throat to try and quell the unease that seems to be boiling over like a volcano shooting lava up into his mouth.
"It's not that simple,"
he tries, furrowing Peter's brows even further.
"Listen, kid, the guy you read about in that museum, the one that used to be Steve's friend, that ain't really me. I mean, it is, but I'm not. What I mean is, Steve and I aren't what you think we are. And the last time we saw each other, it wasn't. We are friends. Worse than that, I'm pretty sure he'd lock me up if he ever found me. I can't ask for his help."
Peter frowns, worry and confusion all mixing together on his face as he asks, "Why would Captain America want to lock you up?" Bucky sighs, hugging Peter back against his chest so he doesn't have to look at those wide, pleading eyes or feel like he's lying straight to the kid's face.
"It's one of those things I can't tell you,"
he says apologetically. Peter's quiet for a moment, then sniffles one last time, wipes his face on the sleeve of his hoodie and says, "Okay," with a small nod against Bucky's chest. The tension leaves Bucky instantly, and he sags into the bench, his arms loosening around Peter before he tightens them again, worried for a split second that he'll let the boy fall. The boy snuggles in, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath as the tension seems to leave him too. Then Peter sighs and says in a quiet, sleepy mumble, "I'm hungry." Bucky smiles, leaning his head back and staring up at the black night sky.
"Yeah, me too, kid. It's late."
"I was supposed to go to Ned's," he whines, going even limper in Bucky's arms as if on purpose. "But I'm so tired."
"It'll take us most of the night to get home anyway,"
says Bucky, sitting Peter up and straightening himself out, stretching his back as he stands from the bench.
"Use my phone and call him. See if you can't go over tomorrow night. Speaking of, instead of takeout this week, I'm buying you a burner phone. No more of this hide-and-seek crap, kid. I'm too old."
"Sorry," Peter says again with a shy smile. "I didn't mean to worry you. I didn't think you'd find out at first, but then when I was sitting here, all I could think about doing was going home. I hadn't decided whether or not I was going to come clean and ask you, or if I just wanted to see you and take advantage of everything while I still had it when you showed up." Bucky wants to say, "You don't have to take advantage of anything. I'm not going anywhere." Wants desperately more than anything to reassure him and do everything, say anything to make him feel safe and secure, but he knows better. He knows that there are very few things in life that he can actually control, that even if he and Peter had been completely normal people, brought together by the simplest, healthiest circumstances possible, there are some things in life that aren't certain, promises that can't be kept. But Bucky swears on every fiber of his being that this will be the one thing that isn't taken away from him.
Going home sounds like a great idea, kid,
he says, ruffling Peter's hair and then taking him by the shoulder and steering him out of the park.
Let's grab some food and hope we don't miss the last bus. If we do, I'm making you jog back to Queens.
Peter laughs, slinging his arm around Bucky's waist in a side hug. That would take like 3 days.
You'll be grateful for all the training we've been doing, that's for sure.
Bucky smiles as Peter laughs again and ruffles the kid's hair affectionately one more time, giving his shoulder a comforting squeeze, feeling the small, warm, breathing body against his side and reveling in it. This is simply a bones and blood that has all come together, culminating into this thing that Bucky loves with all his heart.